Later today, Boris Johnson is expected to announce the return of shopping and gyms on the 3rd of December as he unveils a new three-tier system for England. The Cabinet Minister, Michael Gove, is also due to conclude talks with the devolved governments in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland this week to allow families to get together over Christmas. So is there reason to be cheerful? Joining me now is the Conservative MP for Ludlow, the former Health Minister Philip Dunn, the Labour MP for Ealing Central and Acton, Rupa Huq, and Kirsten Oswald, who's the Scottish National Party's Deputy Leader in the Commons. Thank you all very much indeed for joining us. If I could start with you, Kirsten Oswald, do you think it's important that there should be agreement across the nations which have taken different approaches on COVID as to the Christmas period and what measures should be in place?
That's certainly the aim at the moment, to have these discussions and to reach some kind of collective position. I know that we're not quite there yet, but I think that these are important discussions to have. It's such a difficult time for people, and no matter what comes out of all that, I think we all understand this won't be a normal Christmas. But if we are able to get to a position where we can give a bit more clarity to people on what they can expect and whether there is the ability to connect with their families, in different ways, I think that would be really helpful. We all look forward to that time of year, but that being said, I think that we do have to wait for the detail to come out of this, because it's really important with all of this that we do continue to follow the guidelines that are put in place, because the reason that they're there is to keep all of us safe and to make sure that we do have the ability to look after those around us as well.
Okay, now, do you think, Rupa Huq, that it is even the correct approach to say, let's have tougher restrictions either side of Christmas in order that there can be more socialising at Christmas time?
And I think at the moment, this government seems to be kind of long on rhetoric and short on actual delivery. So I'm not sure what their plan is. It seems to change by the minute. There's so many of these last minute U-turns. So we need to see what the Prime Minister announces this afternoon. But, they were meant to flatten the curve. They often seem to be following the curve. And now these 70 backbenchers have signed a letter saying they don't want any more restrictions. It looks like they're not even following the science. They're sort of having their tail whacked by their own backbenchers. So I'm not sure what their plan is at the moment. Obviously, everyone wants to be around their friends and family at Christmas. It's a family time. Everyone looks forward to it. But this lot have just been behind the curve, as I say, at every step of the way. So, this lockdown we're in, they were insisting till the last minute that there were going to be no more national lockdowns. So, it just changes from minute to minute what they're saying. Let's wait and see what it is we're voting on.
It's a bit of an ironic situation, isn't it, Philip Dunn, given the view on the Tory benches to actually put these measures in place may require the support of the opposition?
Well, despite what Rupa has just said, that rather sort of ungracious response just then, the opposition have been supporting the measures pretty much all the way through in terms of the voting lobbies. They may not have said so across the dispatch box. But when we've just seen, for example, the measures in Liverpool over the last 2 months, the infection rate in Liverpool, which went into the toughest regime first, have come down by 2/3 from about 700 per 100,000 cases to 235, I think, yesterday. So the measures are working, have been working, but I think I agree with Kirsten. We absolutely need to continue to follow the guidelines. The Prime Minister is today going to set out what the plan is for coming out of the current set of national restrictions from the 3rd of December onwards. And we are expecting that to be a degree of tiering, going back to different tiers for different parts of the country. And I think that has every chance of working if people follow the guidelines, as Kirsten was suggesting.
What would you say to colleagues like Steve Baker, who are saying that, they basically don't want any more restrictions?
Well, I think it's quite correct that there is a very difficult judgment to be taken here between the harm to the economy versus the harm to the health of the public. And I think personally the government, and I would say this, wouldn't I, as a former hospitals minister, is doing the right thing in prioritising the safety of the public above everything else. And we absolutely have to make sure that the National Health Service is not overwhelmed during this winter. And the current occupancy rate for patients with COVID is approaching the levels it was at the peak in April, with winter pressures, about to come in on top of that. So I think the government has been right to take this approach thus far, and I think we'll find that Conservative MPs will, some of them with more reluctance than others, will support the government when we get these measures through to vote on next week or later this week, whenever it comes.
Kirsten, obviously priorities have to be decided, and weighing off things like gyms and shops against restaurants and pubs and all that. Where do you think the line needs to be drawn?
Sorry, excuse me. I think it has to all be based upon evidence. I don't think that we can get away from that, and I don't think that we should try to get away from that. So what governments should all be doing, and I can only speak from my knowledge of the way that the Scottish Government works here, it is very much focused on what the scientific advice is, and then decisions are made based upon that. So I guess that takes us back to the Christmas period as well. We shouldn't really be looking at second guessing. I think it's actually a little bit disappointing to see some of the stuff that's been trailed, if you like, from the UK government, because we don't know yet what the answer is that's going to be proposed to the question of Christmas. We don't know what the science is going to tell us about the best way forward, but that has to be the underlying driver for all of this. What is the correct thing to do to try and impede the virus from spreading? So, for instance, in Scotland at the moment, we have a tiered system, which I understand is the likely direction of travel in England after the current lockdown in England ceases. Obviously, we're not in that same position in Scotland, and different areas are in different tiers depending upon the prevalence of the virus in each area. So some areas, like my own, are in tier 4, which is a higher tier, so we have further restriction here. But other areas are in lower tiers, tier 1 and 2 even, and they are able to go about their business slightly more normally. And I think that focus on the need and on the virus and the science that underlies that has to be what takes us forward through all of this, because that is the only way that we will be able to suppress it, so that we can reach some form of COVID-based normality at the very least.
Rupa Huq, you're a London MP. Where do you think London should be placed, or maybe London should be broken down borough by borough? What's your feeling?
I think London should move as one, really, because the nature of our city is all the bits. There are 32 boroughs, but they're very interrelated. People use public transport. They work somewhere different to where they live. I think the 10 p.m. curfew has got to go, and it's been leaked that that's likely to go, because that was massively counterproductive, that there was the same chucking out time for everyone. All my businesses said it was very bad. It was putting everyone onto public transport or to the off licence to get their continuation drinks for an illegal party. So, I think London does generate sort of the majority of the economy's wealth. It's very important to look at London, and I think this needs to be done in partnership with our Labour Mayor, Sadiq Khan. I think quite often this government seems to see local government as the enemy rather than working with it, and it seems to whip out these things at the last minute and surprise everyone. I think they need a more careful, phased approach, and an element of tiering is a good idea. It's wise, but I think London has to move as one. And at the same time, messages need to be clear and understandable. And we know from Boris Johnson's record in London that, again, he could, in the same way he's promised things like world-beating and moonshot this time, and then, it hasn't really materialised. Things like the Garden Bridge, the water cannon, so much waste that we saw when he was mayor of London. We've seen, £130 million, I think, of PR consultants throughout this crisis. And now they're talking about a public sector effective pay cut. We need to see what that actually is. But it's being massively leaked that there'll be a pay freeze. They seem to have got their priorities all wrong.
OK, well, we'll have full coverage, of course, of that announcement from the Prime Minister in the House of Commons this afternoon. Thank you all very much indeed for joining us.